All right. Hey, everybody. So this is going to be the first presidential live stream. If anybody wants to, they can still join. Link is in the Discord. I had a very interesting day today, so I kind of set this up last minute. Hopefully this doesn't make it hard for people to join, but we have some notes. We have some stuff we're going to go over. This was a really interesting book. I'll let Christy introduce herself, and then we will hop in because there's a lot to talk about.
Hi, thanks so much, Ramsey. Yeah, I'm Christy Lewis at Dostoevsky in Space, and this was I don't usually read biographies, but Ramsey had this idea, and I think it's fantastic, so I'm really glad to be here.
All right. And I guess I should introduce myself too. My name is Ramsey. I do the Rajathon YouTube channel and started doing some presidential biographies, just, trying to expand my knowledge. And I was so impressed by Ron Chernow's Hamilton and Grant. Grant was so good, I actually cried when Grant died. It was just, you got to know him. You learned so much about his life and what he was going through. And so wanted to start this. This is going to be probably a multi-year read along, and it's one of those where you can hop in and out whenever you feel like it. So it will definitely be one of the however you feel you want to join. If you only want to do Abraham Lincoln, or if you never really knew anything about Chester Arthur and you were just like, I'd like to learn about that guy, we're totally down for that. So I am really, really excited. Victoria's here from A Musical Bookworm. If you want to join the live stream, you can as well. And if anybody only read half the book and was not able to finish, they can join too, because there's a lot to talk about. I don't think spoilers will happen so much because he's already been alive and dead. So, but yeah, first thing I want to talk about was early life. I wrote down a few notes. Let me get the banner here. Where did I put that? Here we go. All right. So Washington's early life, he was born February 22nd, 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, to Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. His great-grandfather is the one who originally came over back in 1656. His mom was a tough character. As you got to know her more through his talking, his relationship with his mother was rough. His dad died early on, so he had a surrogate father in, is William Fairfax was his name, right?
His father?
Remember. Well, his father was Augustine Washington.
Oh, okay. Then, his grandfather? Who are you talking about?
Yeah, I can't remember his grandfather's name. My notes are incomplete.
I will check. Was it Lawrence Washington? Maybe?
Might have been.
I don't remember the names very well. I just refer to them by their familiar relationships.
Yeah, so I know his father died very early on, and by the time he was 15, he had made friends. Hey, Noah. He had made friends with William Fairfax and his wife, Sally Fairfax, who he kind of fell in love with. Yeah, that's fine. And then his brother, Lawrence, who he was the closest to in 1751, died of tuberculosis. They actually took him to Barbados because they thought it'd be easier on him. He was married to William and Sally Fairfax's daughter. I didn't get her name, but she was the connection where they met. And then Lawrence, when he died, he actually had Mount Vernon, which is the home of George Washington. It was originally named Little Hunting Creek, and Little Hunting Creek was renamed Mount Vernon by Lawrence, his favorite brother. And when he died, he took over Mount Vernon. He inherited it from his brother. So he was also the surveyor of Culpeper County until 1750, and they believe that's where he got a lot of his land and his connections to join the Continental Army under the British, so that they could, so that Fairfax's influence got him a position in the Army when he probably wasn't right for it at the time. It was super
Yeah,
interesting, his early life.
it is. Yeah. And like it does show like he did become, I think, a better general later on, but really what he was really good at, it seems like, was just keeping the Continental Army together, which was quite a feat. He was able to like get respect from his men, but like you can see he made some bad mistakes in his early career and in his later one. So, yeah.
Yeah, the big one was he probably started the French and Indian War with his mistakes. Like that was his first controversy.
Yeah, that was
Just
bad.
he had the Iroquois half king take him to the French. The French were creating forts on British land, and so it's really iffy. He never really said the truth, which that huge myth that he never told a lie. Um, he killed a French envoy, a special envoy, very brutally. Well, or let his men do it, and that made the French mad. So he created a fort because he thought he was going to be attacked by the French. The fort was horrible, called Fort Necessity, and basically he got his butt handed to him at Fort Necessity,
Yeah.
and was sent back to the British colonies, like embarrassed. But instead of it becoming a big debacle, somehow it got turned around in the newspaper that he did a good job, and he like got praise for it. Like I
That was
like
so interesting
yeah.
because yeah, because he pretty much like it was a defeat because obviously he got a lot of men killed. He like just pulled that massive blunder by killing the Frenchmen who didn't need to be killed. They were like a peace envoy. And then totally confirming the British opinion of the like backwater, American rebels, at the time. It's just not rebels yet, but like the backwater American regiment. So yeah, it was just bad. And yet somehow people were like, "Oh, he was brave to stand there and die." And it was just like again and again that seemed to happen for him though, where he would just have this like divine touch over his life where um his mistakes, it's not like he never got like wailed for his mistakes, especially later in life, but
Mhm.
yeah.
It was crazy. Like I didn't realize how much the newspapers had influence on life back then. Like
Mhm.
they did hit pieces through the newspaper. They like created their own newspaper to do hit pieces on people. Like they did things anonymously just so that they didn't have to deal with knowing who they were. They like, oh
All
man,
the
it was
Greek and
just
Roman
nuts.
names, the
Uh-huh.
pet
Yeah,
names.
like and it's fun if you guys have read the Hamilton biography. It really sheds a different light on what is going on later in the war. At this point, still early in his career, um, he actually gained a hate for the British through his early military service. I think he was very vain too, where if he was slighted, he was like, "Well, I'll just quit then. I won't be part of this." Like very protective of his um, what would you call that? Very protective of his name, I guess. Like
Yeah,
if
his
his name was
reputation.
slandered, he would just find a way out of it. And he did a very good job politically, like not getting into. Oh, here's the pictures that I had. I'll try to share this with you guys real quick.
Sweet.
This is the Fort Necessity. Nope, not that screen. On this screen. Um, Fort Necessity was this little fort here. I'll try to stretch it out.
Right.
And
Oh.
this is from the Mount Vernon. I shared this in the Discord if you guys are curious about it.
Yeah.
This is from the Mount Vernon website where it talks about his battles. But he literally created this fort. They were getting rained on. All their powder was wet, so they couldn't fight back. And it was a bloodbath in there. It was like one of the worst. Like the Iroquois king, the half king, was like, "This is a bad idea," and they abandoned him. The French were like, "I don't know why they stayed in this thing. It was like down in a hole, so we could shoot over the walls." Um, I'll show you exactly where it was too. I got the picture of that. So this is Williamsburg, and then Fort Necessity is right here, Great Meadows, which is awesome name. And then this is the French fort, Duquesne. I'm not very good with my French, but
Duquesne, I think.
Duquesne. Yes, that sounds much better. Oh,
I just heard it. I don't know. Maybe.
But he was really trying to get a lot of this land in here, and you find out that Washington owned, I can't move that, but he actually, by the end of his life, owned like all of this land. He owned so much land. I think he owned all of West Virginia at one point.
Yikes, that doesn't sound strategically sound at all.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
I can add that here.
You'll be wincing all through that part when you read it, Victoria.
Oh man, it was so crazy. Like, here, I can stop screen. Okay, stop screen. Yeah, it was just nuts how he made some bad decisions, and then, but through political maneuvering, he just was considered so smart, and that like he did everything right, which was crazy to think that he had everybody just wrapped around his finger on it. Politically, he did such a good job that way.
Generally, when you think of people who are like that, they have these stainless reputations. They're so good at politics. In general, like I generally think, oh, I probably wouldn't like a person like that, or at least not admire them morally. But I still do admire him morally. Like, he's kind of a special case. He actually did have a strong sense of morality and likely a faith, like maybe.
I was very conflicted. I was curious about his faith because it felt like his faith was political most of the time, but he
would like switch. Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't mind going to different churches because that's where his men were. He didn't, which I'm not against, like, I believe like Christianity is an umbrella. Like the Protestant religion is, just an offshoot of a different, I've always thought Catholics, as long as they believe Jesus is Lord, that they're in the right boat. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know doctrinally, like how much, how off that might, like you can go from like an Episcopalian church to a non-denominational church. And as long as Jesus is the focus, I think you're still Christian.
Alan from Alexandria said there is like a prayer journal or something, or like letters or something where he's praying. And so that like if we had access to that, it would give us maybe a little bit of a clue in there. But it seems like publicly, and that he was the same way with slavery. He didn't share his convictions publicly a lot of times. If he had like really individual convictions, he wanted to be very open publicly so that he wasn't like isolating anybody, which has pros and cons.
Yeah, like I think he could have killed slavery. Like, and I'll talk about. I have a whole banner for slavery, but I think if he took a stand on slavery, I think he could have killed it.
I agree.
And I think it was. It sounds like the founding fathers hoped it would die slowly. They just didn't have to do it because it was so politically damaging. Because, even Thomas Jefferson, who had slaves in the White House, talked about how he'd like it to end eventually. But then when the cotton gin came in, I'm not exactly sure when, but the boom of the cotton market in the South just made slavery something that they wanted to keep forever. Like economically, it was such a poor choice. Even Washington wrote letters about how there's nothing really to motivate slaves, and a private citizen would do harder work because they're working for their money. And slaves, you have to motivate by fear. Victoria, yes, he wanted to end slavery. He actually freed his slaves when he died, but he was so caught up in money. He was very, very worried about money. And some of the things that happened in his life made money hard for him. And he bought slaves at a price. And unless he could recoup that price, I don't think he was willing to get rid of his slaves until his life was over. Which is
like his entire...
It was so conflicting. He was so all over the place with his morality and his money love. Like the thing that kept him from being a good moral man 100% was his love of money.
Yeah, because pretty much Mount Vernon was always like not a rich place. And hard scrabble existence early on, like trying to get into the upper sphere of society. He essentially married into it, as I
Hmm.
recall. Um, he never like lost that. So it was hard. I think you said it perfectly, Ramsey, when you were like, he would have to recoup his losses in order to actually step into a slave-free, world of planting, because he wanted to, but like you said, he just never could actually gather up the will and the strength to do it because Mount Vernon was always in the red. It was like never in the black. And so he just felt like it would ruin him if he just set free all of his slaves, which eventually he did do, but yeah.
And it was weird too because so I have it written down here in his early life. When he got out of the military, he went into farming. He went back to Mount Vernon, and he married the widow Martha Custis, who had two children, Washi and Nellie, in January 6th, 1759. She was 27. I believe she was 2 years older than him. But that marriage was completely about money. She had slaves and land, and he thought like he liked her. But he didn't love her. He loved Sally Fairfax, who she kind of reciprocated that in letters. They were very fond of one another. Even late in his life, he wrote to her about the happiest moments of his life were when he was living with the Fairfaxes, surveying Culpeper County, and they had their love. It's never stated if they consummated that love. And when he married Martha, he encouraged Martha and Sally to have a friendship up until the Fairfaxes went to England during the Revolutionary War. And so he gained two children. He never had children himself, probably because he had smallpox as a child. Because Martha had two children. She clearly could have children, but he never had children. There was a weird, very unconfirmed story that he may have fathered a half black child, but that seems very unlikely.
Yeah.
But and it was weird too because he loved Nellie. Nellie was his stepdaughter. And then Washi, he had a hard time with. Washi was the kind of like frat boy kid that went to college because his stepfather got him into college. He had like mentors set aside for him, and the mentors were like, he's not even showing up to classes. He's just here drinking, spending your money. Eventually, he just quit college altogether.
So Nellie and Washi were his grandchildren, right? By Jackie
Well,
Custis.
when Washi the first time had he got renamed. His first, I can't remember what his first name was. It was what was his first name? Martha's son was named something, and then they renamed him Washington as like his middle name, and he went by Washi for years, I think, or maybe his grandson.
So I remember there
remember.
was Jackie Custis was Martha's son, and
That's
Washington had quite a
Mhm.
quite a sordid history with Jackie there. Well,
Yes,
yeah.
you're right.
So
I had that
and then
wrong.
Washi was his kid. But yeah, Washi and Jackie were like the same thing. They were very similar. So yeah, yeah, pretty much. You could say all the same things about them.
Yeah, because that's why I got that confused. Because
Yeah.
Jackie named one of his daughters after his sister, who died of epilepsy. She only made it to 17.
That was so sad.
And he was tore up about it too. Like they had Martha and George both had like all their family die before them. Like they watched their children die, they watched their parents die, they watched their brothers and sisters die. I mean, by the time they were done, they were like, look, I'm over, I'm done. Let's just calmly pass away into the end of our life. But one of the interesting things, there was a lot of scandal, and like growing up, you hear about Washington cut down his father's cherry tree, which is not true.
Right.
And you hear that he never told a lie. So when you look at when he joined the House of Burgesses, he got everybody in the county drunk so that they would vote for him. And when he got elected to the Houses of Burgesses, like he was not the guy we were originally told he was. It's so crazy.
He was a colorful guy.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He had a
I
personality for sure. He was a ladies' man, and like, yeah,
all the
he's
time they talked about how much he loved to dance with the ladies.
yeah. And Martha's just like, fine, his very kind wife that he gets along with real well, but clearly they're not like. I don't think Washington was actually going out and like consummating, physical relationships with all these
Mhm.
ladies, but he sure loved to flirt.
It seemed like the only one was it Elizabeth Powell in Philadelphia? Might
Oh,
have
that was a
been,
possibility. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
But for the most part, yeah, it felt like all his officers' wives he loved to dance with. What was it? Nathaniel Green's wife.
Right.
He loved dancing with her because she was supposedly very pretty. Um, Victoria mentions it must have been so hard to stay healthy at that time. Yeah, a
Right?
big focus was his teeth.
Yeah.
The wooden teeth is a myth, but it was probably he had ivory teeth, and then he bought slaves' teeth. We don't know if they were given compensation for that, but basically he bought a whole set of dentures made out of slaves' teeth, and he wore
Yeah,
slaves'
that's so
teeth.
gross.
Like, and then he had like, what was it, walrus ivory in his teeth, and so um, they thought his teeth, because they turned so brown, that they were made out of wood, and that's where the myth comes from.
Yeah. Oh, the saga of the teeth was terrible. And I can't believe that rich people would literally just go out and buy teeth from slaves. That is something I do not ever recall learning ever.
Mm-mm.
Like, what? That's so gross.
And you really start to see his dislike of slavery in this time when he was farming. He'd been researching. He was never a farmer, so everything he learned farming was self-taught, and he looked at the fact that slaves perform better when they were cared for. Slaves perform better when they had their own agency. Like he let his slaves hunt on Sundays when they had the day off and earn their own money. Um, so he was very forward thinking with his slaves. And when he was on Mount Vernon, I think they were treated much better. But he hired like a revolving door of overseers that we have no idea um, what they were actually doing when he wasn't there. And he
Yeah.
talked about how every time he came back, the house looked worse and worse and worse and worse. How he was so disappointed in the way that the overseers were talking to the slaves. But he felt like if you were pregnant, if you were old, you needed to still do the same amount of work as when you were doing well.
Right. He would
So
really push them for every ounce of strength and effort. When I remember there was the story that when some oh hey Una
it's
there
okay. You'll learn just hearing us talk about it.
we're glad you're here. And Victoria had a comment too that
Yeah.
the old dental equipment looks like torture devices. Yeah. And there's a lot of medical stories in here too. Like I'm not surprised that there were so many deserters during the Civil War cuz really who wants to get shot by one of those things and then have your leg, amputated in the field. Like, no thanks.
Yeah, like when we get to the war and we talk about Valley Forge, like I didn't realize how awful Valley Forge was and how
Yeah.
complicated and dangerous the lives of the early military was. How right before battles, he had to convince them with like $5 bounties that I need to stay. Please stay in the military so that we can fight a battle. Like he had half his
Yeah.
military just say, "Well, my 1 year draft is over, so I can go now, and we're about to have this battle, so it's a really good time for me to go."
Yeah, that seemed like his overriding fear. While basically his job was keep the army together
Mhm.
essentially, and try and train them into troops, which is just an enormous task. But like hanging over his head, and it was like a complete secret. He couldn't tell anyone this. He never had enough troops. He was always trying to make it look like he had more than he had, and they were constantly like they had like a I don't know a short amount of time where they had to be a troop, and then they could just leave. And he was so afraid that they would just leave, and one day he would have no army, and that was just hanging over his head all the time. It was always a concern, and I can't even imagine dealing with that as a general, plus lots of other problems. There's a lot of problems that seem, I don't know if they're unique to the Civil War, but it's just things that I never even thought of that they would have to deal with back then. Like food and shelter at Valley Forge, like over the winter, like when we talk about that, yeah.
It felt like we should have never won. The only reason we won is because they were so far away.
Yeah, pretty much.
See you, Victoria. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Bye, Victoria.
Watch the rest of the live stream. There's a lot of stuff on it. Even if you haven't read the book, we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff. So let's hop into the war. What were your thoughts before you read the book on like what the Revolutionary War was? Because I had my mind changed about a bunch of things that I just was not.
I was saying Civil War. Sorry, I meant Revolutionary War.
I knew what you meant.
Okay. Hopefully everybody else did. So what were my thoughts leading up to it, you said?
Yeah, because we don't study it much in school. At least growing up in Florida, we didn't do a ton of Revolutionary War study. And all I knew is that we won, and I thought we won in 1776. I didn't realize the war was 8 years long. And I had no idea about, you'd heard about Valley Forge, I guess. And I watched the show, was it Turn? I think about the Revolutionary War spies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it had been Benedict Arnold. Ugh.
And other guys. Oh my gosh, all the stories of the spies in here were just insane. So leading up to the Revolutionary War, I read a book in college called, I forget exactly what it was called. It was by, well, anyway, I'll let you know later so we can put it in the Discord. So I knew something about the Revolutionary War. But yeah, no, this just brought it home in a different way because you were following Washington, the man, through all of his personal struggles, and it really just puts you there. And then he would talk about like the general context that Washington was living in. And I really loved the way he did that. It just really brought it home in a way that, like, I'm not going to remember a lot of stuff from books that are about the subject of war. But if you go into one person's life and you follow all the ways that it affected them, that's a lot easier for me personally to remember. So, yeah. I didn't really know that it was all about the whole thing about taxes. Like, that was interesting to me, that it was essentially I didn't understand how that happened exactly, how taxes played, you hear that it's the Boston Tea Party and all that, but it described it really well in here. I have notes somewhere.
I like getting his idea as a member of the House of Burgesses, how he came to the decision that it, like, for a long time it was just a revolt. It wasn't a revolution. And then when King George actually said, he kind of made the decision for them that it was going to be a revolution. And then they were finally like, oh man, we have to actually like create a government. And, they were just created a group of people who were like petitioning Britain for their rights, the rights they thought they should have had. Because the crown would send governors in to govern these colonies, and the people who actually lived in the colonies had no say so, which was so interesting to see the way that when it did happen, you were like, oh, well, that makes sense now, and when you get later into like the beginning of our country, we had no plan. It was actually good that the war lasted so long because we were able to slowly build a government, see what didn't work, what was failing at the time, and what we could do as a country to actually do a better job of creating a government. It wasn't perfect. That's why they ended up having to have the Articles of Confederation. I think that's what it is, right? I wrote it down.
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah,
Articles of Confederation. The First Continental Congress was really, really bad. They had no money. They had they basically had to beg the states for money so that they could provide for the military. Like when Washington took over He left his house I wrote it down. He left his house April 19th, 1775, and he didn't make it back for over 9 years before he finally made it home. Like,
yeah. And a lot of the troops that were there with him, they weren't getting paid or anything. So whenever they would have revolts, it was like he understood why they were upset and he would try and get them some money. It was just horrible for all of them. I found the quote.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say the quote that I found that was helping me understand the cause of the Revolutionary War better was about the tea tax. So the tea tax wasn't as punitive as is commonly supposed, but it threatened local merchants by eliminating smugglers and colonial middlemen, entrenching the East India Company's monopoly. It also perpetuated the hated practice of taxation without representation. So that kind of symbolizes all of their complaints about their relationships with the mother country.
Mm-hmm. It's what we currently do to Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wouldn't know.
That's their big complaint. I always hear taxation without representation.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's more commonly known on the East Coast. I've never even heard that out here on the West Coast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool too. What they described when he took over the Continental Army, almost entirely made up of Northern troops. So he was a Southern general coming in to take over Northern troops, and they were dirty. They were unwashed. They were, I mean, the way they talked about it, like the French would come in, were just so disgusted by our military. It was so interesting to see like how Washington's idea that he gained in his early military career of kind of guerrilla warfare that the Native Americans used to fight the French. And he saw that being very, very good for a underused, how would you describe it? A underprovided for smaller army with less training. You just stand behind a tree and shoot when you're reloaded, and not stand in a column and shoot at other people. It makes sense.
He learned quick that was the way to do it.
Yeah.
But not everybody wanted to do it that way because it wasn't traditional.
I thought it was really cool too when they stated that when he took over, they had like 18 barrels of gunpowder, which every person in the military had like 1.5 shots. When he took over the military, like that's all that they had at that time. Like they had to capture British forts through deceit to actually get the supplies that they needed to do the and then like Henry Knox's story, a former bookseller who went to Fort Ticonderoga, and went and got all those cannons. Like we had no cannons. So he went to an old abandoned British fort and took all their cannons and brought them over frozen rivers and he staged it where as they did a really good David McCullough did a really good job describing this in 1776. But Henry Knox would have people ride out and like to get Revolutionary War fervor, he would have them like all come and see the cannons rolling through town as he brought them back to the army. And so he'd like get everybody all excited and they'd cheer and they'd go, yeah, cannons are coming. And so
he was just trying to build the confidence. That was it. That's all he had.
Henry Knox's story was really, really cool through the war. Him and Nathaniel Greene were two of the coolest generals who kind of came from nothing, kind of like Washington, and really made a name for themselves. It was really, really cool to hear their stories.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably too much to go over through the entire Revolutionary War, but I know we were talking about Valley Forge. I want to talk about that a little bit, and then anything in the Revolutionary War you wanted to talk about?
Whatever you want to talk about is great.
Okay. So the crossing of the Delaware is really, really cool. I think everybody should read that and look it up. That was one of the best things Washington did in the entire war.
One of his few successes.
Yes.
was a retreat.
It was like a retreat. They did a lot of they would retreat but create a bunch of campfires and have a bunch of people yell and bang pots like they were like they were still there. So then they would retreat and get around the army of the British. And when the British got there in the morning, they were like, "There's nobody here."
Lots of sneaky tactics necessary here.
It was definitely an interesting way they did the war. Valley Forge was really interesting. They didn't fight in the winter back in that time. So what they did is they needed a place to spend the winter. And so Valley Forge, I wish I had a map of where Valley Forge is in, let me see if I can look it up real quick.
Okay.
Valley Forge was where they wintered in, was it the third?
Oh, what year
I think
was
it was
that?
the third year of the war.
Yeah, 70. I think it was 79. Uno can probably tell us. He says we hit the Revolutionary War heavy in Illinois.
Yeah. But it kind of looked, let me see if I can enlarge this. I found a bunch of pictures on the internet. So Valley Forge is the place Washington's men camped out during the winter. Oh, this is for like kids. The Patriot Army first entered Valley Forge when there were about 11,000 men. 2,000 men died from disease, and 2,000 men deserted from Valley Forge. So it was one of the worst things they did in the war. And it was the worst conditions. There were men living in homemade huts with no shoes, barely a blanket, on the ground, getting sick. It was just a crazy time in the war. He lived like his men lived, is the only reason he kept the army together, because I think everybody would have deserted, because they looked at him and they saw him living the same way that they were living and thought, okay, well, at least he knows what we're going through.
Right. And he would listen to them, and he had this like mystical bond with them by the end of that, especially.
I think
even later when he, go ahead. Sorry.
I think at one point they said they were boiling leather and eating leather because it was so bad. I couldn't remember if it was saddle leather or shoe leather or book covers, but basically if it was edible, they ate it. And a lot of people got sick because of it.
Yeah. I guess they probably ate their horses. I never even thought about having to protect yourselves during the winter like that. That was such a revelation to me. It was like, I've heard, oh yeah, well, how are you going to feed 1 million troops, in fiction and stuff, when it's like, there was 1 million troops. Like, how are you going to feed that? But like, also, yeah, how are you going to shelter 1 million troops? Like, unless the people around in the area are very willing to give you shelter and food, you're kind of in trouble.
And the British paid more for supplies, so farmers did not want to give supplies to the Continental Army. I
know. That was a continuous other battle that Washington had with the whole country. He was so furious that they wouldn't give their own troops food, that they would actually give food to the British because they would pay higher prices. What was that? War profiteering. He was so frustrated by that.
He wanted to try them all as traitors.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little fuzzy because I read this a little while ago on the end of the war. I know initially Washington wouldn't even answer letters that were not addressed to the general of the Continental Army. Like they for a long time they addressed him as the traitor George Washington. And he wouldn't answer those letters. He's like,
who's that?
Yeah. So there were some. I feel like I remember.
Just briefly, too, his opinion of his troops changed a lot. By the end, he was like, I do not believe that any of these states produce better men or persons capable of making better soldiers, he said of Virginian troops, which was not his opinion in the beginning.
Una, I took a bunch of notes. So we just got back from vacation, and this is my notes that I took before vacation. And these are the notes that I was supposed to take yesterday. So there's going to be a lot of I thinks, and maybe I don't remember because I forgot to take notes because the snow in Texas made us had to change our vacation, and we went to Las Vegas and some national parks instead. So we have been out of town.
And I've been doing updates on Instagram, but only like the second half of the book. So the first half I'm a little rusty on.
So good. You'll be able to do most of the second half.
Yeah, hopefully.
Do you remember the British surrender, how that went down? Because I'm really fuzzy on it, on how we handled that. I know we had to. I know we negotiated for all of our captured soldiers back, which a lot of them died on the slave ships or the prisoner
bones.
ships.
Okay, yeah, it talked about how in the British slave ships, so many Americans died. They treated the Americans terribly. I don't think the Americans treated the British captives that badly. Like, I think they were treated much better. But so the bones of the American soldiers from those ships were washing up on the shores of, was it the East River, for like years to come. So that was really terrible conditions. And I just remember that the British were not graceful about how they evacuated various cities, and because they would like grease the flagpole so you couldn't put up the American flag when they left. I remember there was like negotiations with other prisoners of war, and it was such a pain. I don't remember all the specific stuff very well, but
there's a big fight about returning slaves too.
Yeah. So
I love the handwritten notes. My son tells me his hand cramps when he gets up to the teens when practicing numbers. We've recently started making my son do sentences, and he hates them with a passion. He's like, I'll type sentences. I'm like, no, you're going to handwrite sentences. So that has worked as a punishment. So, so how about post-war life? I thought one of the most interesting things about that is that everybody wanted to visit him, and he did not have the money to continue to host dinners for all the random people that showed up at his doorstep. He was flat broke.
Right.
And
never told a soul.
Nope.
Yeah, that was so interesting. He was like, nobody understands my position. I'm this grand hero, and everybody just assumes that because I have this gorgeous plantation, which he's always thinking about throughout the war. You see in his letters and everything, all he ever wants is to be back at Mount Vernon with Martha, just chilling. And so when he finally got back there, he had no time to enjoy it because he was trying to make up for all the losses that happened during the war. Essentially, there was nothing good that was happening back on Mount Vernon while he was at the war. It was just falling into disrepair. And then suddenly he has this flood of all these people who just expect him to house them and give them money while they stay with him. And yeah, it's stressful. Like people, sometimes he wouldn't know who they are. They just come with like, they may come with a letter of recommendation. He started like requesting, please bring a letter of recommendation, so I know who you are and where you're coming from. And he just constantly had a stream of visitors coming in and out. And later on, I don't think he hated that when he was at Mount Vernon, but it was hard because he never had privacy. It was later in his presidency, I think, that he really got tired of having visitors all the time. He was very uncomfortable, and his teeth weren't fitting him very well, and he was in pain and stress. But at Mount Vernon, I think it was just he didn't have any money.
I think they did mention after his second term, he was getting really hard of hearing. So when people came to visit, it was like he wasn't paying attention to them, but he was so prideful that if he didn't hear you, he just wouldn't respond. He wouldn't ask, what did you say? He would just pretend he would just not say anything. Like, right. I didn't hear that, so I'm not saying anything. Like he would never ask you to repeat yourself because he didn't want to let people know that he was going hard. He was hard of hearing.
So he got this reputation as a cold fish when it was really just, he's nearly deaf.
Yeah. They said it was the cannon fire and the just age, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, he made so many sacrifices, and people just, even to, like, I know people today do not understand the sacrifices that veterans made, and it was just the same back then. And for his political life, it was all sacrifice too, because it's not like he was paid every time he had to go visit like for the Continental Congress, and when everybody was visiting him, he always had to pay for this stuff. And yeah, he just made so many sacrifices. So hearing, health, time away from home, all that stuff. And his slaves probably paid a lot of that as well, because if he had not been off doing all these various important things, he might, I think if he had gotten Mount Vernon under control, he probably would have freed his slaves earlier, because he hated the system so much. He could never get them working well. And he was so meticulous with his workers. So that's just a personal theory of mine. So everybody sacrificed a lot.
I think if Lafayette actually came and lived with him, he would have freed his slaves too. Because
Yes.
he loved Lafayette like a son. He was so, like, we didn't mention him in the war, but like his contributions in the war, like just bolstering up Washington. We kind of talked about it in the Discord, like when he liked somebody, he called them like "Dear Sir," and then like Lafayette got the "Very Dear Sir." Like he loved him like a son. Lafayette was a Frenchman who came over and basically was just like, the revolution, yeah, and just loved Washington like a father. Named his children Washington. I think he named like his son Washington Jr. and his daughter like Washina. Like he loved Washington so much, and he was so against slavery. So his biggest sentiments against slavery happened when Lafayette was there.
Yeah,
and I think if
a good influence,
he encouraged Lafayette to live at Mount Vernon with him, and if he would have taken him up on that and didn't go back to join in the French Revolution, I think he could have ended slavery, or at least freed his personal slaves. But Lafayette not being there, he went back to his, I need the money for these slaves, or I'm not going to give them up.
Right.
So let's go into the First Continental Congress and his first term in office, like the Articles of Confederation and all that. I know you've read the Federalist Papers, right?
I've only read a couple of them.
Okay.
It was really good what I read, but yeah, I haven't read very far. I would like to. Are we going to make that part of the read along?
I would totally be down for it. I found
Let's do it.
A free version on Kindle that I downloaded onto my Kindle, so I definitely plan on reading it. If everybody wants to, I'm definitely down for it. I know the Hamilton biography goes into the Federalist Papers a lot because he wrote probably 76 of them.
Yeah.
He wrote a ton of them. And then it's weird. You learn so much about the other future presidents through Washington's life. Madison, Jefferson, Adams, Monroe a little bit. But it's crazy to see the life of these early founding fathers, and so flawed the version that we get in this book. We didn't get that back then. Like it feels like it feels like they watered it down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything about all the infighting. So like this was something I noticed in the book that was really sad, was at the beginning, like there was political disagreements between all these guys, but mostly they were friends. Like I think it was like maybe Sam Adams who was kind of, was it Sam? No, John Adams, not Sam Adams.
John Henry really wanted to be the first president too, and that like somehow they did a hit piece on him and got him where he was not. Or was it John Hancock? John Hancock, the guy that's saying,
right.
But like they did the political maneuvering. They're like, we want Washington to be first, we want John Adams to be second,
right?
And like
and that irreparably damaged the relationship between Hamilton and John Adams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you learn so much more about that in the Hamilton biography. It was a really, really good to read both of them by Ron Chernow, because he kind of everything he didn't say in the Washington biography, he said in the Hamilton biography, especially for like the Articles of Confederation, where like all the states had to accept it. Like that was so much more in the Hamilton biography. Like you learn so much more about it.
Well, dang it, Ramsey! Now I have to go back and read it.
It was good.
We'll have to do a live stream.
It was long, but it was really, really good. The Hamilton biography was good. I highly recommend it.
I started it. I probably got like halfway through it a couple of years ago, but yeah. So
audiobook is the way to go for that one because it can get kind of dry.
I audiobooked a lot of this, but I also like took a lot of notes too. But
I've been looking for it. I have not found it for under like $17. So when I find it for under like $17, I had a free credit on Audible, so that's why I did it.
Nice. I have one free credit on Audible, and that's why I got this. I got this on Audible.
So once they did go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say they were all really good friends at the start of all of this happening, and then slowly, as the politics continued and all of the political lambasting in the papers continued, people started stabbing each other in the back, and none of them were friends by the end of it. And Washington, who started off as like a very nonpartisan president, I mean, he had biases because in the army, he saw what happened if your army didn't have the strength of a federal government behind it. So he was like a federalist in the beginning, but he kept a team that was very like Hamilton, which is very federalist, starting the federal bank, and people on the other side, like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. He had them all together working with him in the beginning. And then by the end, he was like, I can't take all the fighting anymore. I can't take the backstabbing. I'm done. I have to just have my Federalists all around me. So it really just like ruined his relationships, ruined his health, and it became no longer a nonpartisan thing. The two-party system definitely, and he didn't understand the two-party system at the time. He just thought there's people for the Constitution and people against it. But it clearly, that's how things shook out. There was a two-party system with lots of just rancor between the two of them. And it seemed kind of unavoidable to me because if anybody could have unified it, it seems like Washington would have been the one to do it. And even he couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think the two-party system, and he thought so too, is a horrible way to do government because you either have one way or the other. Like, sorry, I can't get both my hands on the screen, but like there's no middle ground with the two-party system. And I think if we had a third or fourth party, it would give us so much better options. Hey, Alan. I think it would just give us so many better options where, you know, if you felt like, okay, well, I agree with this person on these issues, but not these. And so maybe we meet in the middle somewhere. Those people have no options. And I think that was one of the things that Washington hated. But he ended up becoming by his second term. And I think he picked less qualified cabinet members just because they were Federalists. So
I think, like, I feel like he didn't, in the biography, it said he didn't have a lot of choice. Like, he felt like he just didn't know anybody who could honestly get the job done very well. And I don't know, you just wonder because he found all these stellar people for his first term. How was there nobody for the second term? I don't know, but I don't know.
Well, lot of the people he tried to pick, like John Jay, and they were like, "Well, I've already got a job. I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to be."
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah.
So it was
just frustrating.
His second term was definitely not as good as his first. Yeah.
Yeah. That looked really. It sounded miserable, and I'm sure it was. And by that time, he was getting lambasted in the press so much, which apparently he wasn't used to earlier on. He was used to being the glorified hero kind of guy. So
they did a much worse. That's not proper English. They did a much worse job of protecting him in the press by his second term. They weren't. Yes, Jefferson and Madison teamed up to really make his second term a pain in the butt.
I know. I can't believe how they treated him. It was so terrible. And Jefferson, like, to his face is all like, "Oh yeah, we're friends." No, you're not. And once you lose Washington's trust, it's hard to get it back.
What it was, by the end, you know, we talked about "Dear Sir" and "My very dear sir." Like by the end, he called Thomas Jefferson that man.
That man.
Like this biography and the Hamilton biography, I have a horrible impression of Thomas Jefferson. I can't wait to get his biography because right now I do not like Thomas Jefferson one tiny bit at all. So I'm excited to see like the difference when we get there. Because
yeah, even the little I read of the Hamilton biography, he gave a very different opinion of Washington than even I came out of this book with. So I will be very interested to see. Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah, we'll have to see. Long and Adams was such a character. Oh my gosh! But I can't wait to read the Adams biography because it, they were all kind of ornery and lovable in their own ways, I think. But
And David
I feel
McCullough
like
did a really good job on 1776. So I'm really excited for John Adams.
yeah, me too. What else? Jefferson also butchered his second term. Yeah, I guess we'll get to that in his biography.
Well, let's go into the topic of slave. Well, did we do second term the rest of it? Yes. Rest of his life, he kind of died sad. I felt awful for Washington at the end of his life. It felt like he was just kind of relegated to a general under Adams, and then because Adams didn't get exactly what he wanted in the military, he wanted Hamilton to not be part of it, and Washington wanted Hamilton to be part of it, and so they tried to do a standing army. Standing army got disbanded. Washington was supposed to be the big general, and not long after that, he died. I didn't write down when he died, but like it was pretty soon after that, if I remember correctly. It was sad, the end of his life, the way he kind of drifted off into obscurity, and then the newspapers just kind of ran with it and said, all right, well, let's do that's where all the rumors started about the cherry tree, and he never told a lie and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember it said like after his death, there was not very many good biographies coming out about him. People were just, there was the real syrupy sweet one like that you're referencing, I think, where there was all these myths that they were trying to perpetuate about him that just weren't true and they weren't real to life. They were trying to raise him up as to be almost like a divine god man or something. And you know, he was a guy. He was a man. He did kind of give he wanted to give that impression that he was sort of above the fray in a lot of ways, but he was a very he was a man just like everybody else.
He did do a good job compiling all his Revolutionary War notes, where he started. Did he start his library? I can't remember. Like he had the I can't. I wish I wrote it down. If I hadn't been on vacation, I'd have wrote it down. But he had that man come live with him in Mount Vernon and basically catalog all of his notes on the war and do a really Washington. What's the saying? He categorized all of the stuff that they did in the war, and that was very, very good to see. That like he wanted everybody to know what happened in the war and how the war happened and went down. I like that a lot.
Yeah, he did a pretty good job like preserving his image. I feel that it talked a lot about how many like statues he had made of himself and paintings and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad that he
hated to
kept
sit
all
for
his
them, but
papers.
he did a lot of them.
Yes.
Well,
He was the saint of the Republic.
Let's go into slavery. I did a little bit of study just because I thought he could have ended it.
Yeah. I wonder if Alan has thoughts on that, because
yes, I'd love to hear. And if he wants to join, he can. The link is in the Discord. He can jump in if he has, because I didn't. Alan, I'm pretty sure that you studied political history, right? It's take a while for the comment to come in, but
yeah. That was so interesting. That I never even thought about that he could have ended slavery. That's a really interesting theory. Like, I feel like he really hated the institution like a lot because it didn't do that much for him. But like you were saying earlier, he just couldn't figure out how to keep Mount Vernon afloat and also get rid of them. So
I looked really, really hard while I was reading at what it cost to take care of a slave, like day to day, like housing, clothing, food. The only thing I could find is how much purchase of a slave from Africa was in 1780, which was 17 to 20 pounds, is basically which during the Civil War, they were selling for almost 300 pounds. East Asia politics. Gotcha. So
Okay.
once cotton became a big thing, slaves became the boom on slavery was so much more. But if we could have ended it right at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, or at the end of the Revolutionary War, beginning of our government, I think it was trying to die kind of the way that Brazil's died, where it slowly was phased out and they just stopped having slavery, and eventually it felt like the government, like people in power, especially Washington, didn't want to be the one that stood up and said slavery bad. Um,
Right, because it would totally ruin your career, and you would have to obviously follow suit, which would ruin your own plantation. So even though there was a lot of influences coming from France and Britain that were very abolitionist, and um, it it was just it was so entrenched already, and like you were talking about with the cotton gin coming up later, the slave population just boomed here, and even on Mount Vernon, it said something. There was a crazy amount of his slaves that were very young, so it was booming even then. Yeah,
they
something like that.
there was something like that. I think Virginia was also a big proponent to losing slavery, which him coming from Virginia, it was hard for him. He was hated in his own state by his second term. Because Jefferson and Madison just lambasted him so much that he was actually not very well liked in Virginia. That's part of the reason the Hamilton musical kind of goes a little bit of circles around it, but that's one of the big reasons that Hamilton let let the capital be in Virginia, because it
So they could
was
still have slaves.
yeah
In the White
um,
House.
it was just so difficult. I really wanted to find a good number, and if we can ever get a research study on like what it costs to house a slave, I guarantee you could have had better treatment of individuals if you freed them, let them do their own housing, clothing, food, and then they worked for a living. That gives you the ability, like if I was a Quaker back in the day, that would be my whole argument. Like it's financially, it's a bad financial stance to own slaves. Like they don't work as hard as free people would. They you no longer have to pay for all these things, because he really hated paying for medical expenses, housing. Like he treated his slaves really well, and he still had poor living conditions for his slaves. um I just feel like if he could have taken a stance and said, no, I'm not going to let it happen anymore. Like the whole thing where he freed his slaves, but the dowry slaves of Martha and his grandchildren, he couldn't free them because he had no rights over them. Um, so part of his slaves were freed and part of them weren't. Like,
And they were intermarried, so it was just like that was such a sad situation that even when they were finally free, it's like they can't just leave. Their spouses are still enslaved.
and then
Yeah.
like, how hard was it? Like they did so much when they were when the House of Center of Government was in Philadelphia. If slaves lived in Philadelphia for 6 months, they were immediately free. So Martha and Washington did so many
Right.
things to send their slaves back on like weird things so that they didn't get free. And it was like I want to like you, but you're doing these awful things to people that you own, which is not okay. And like Hercules, his cook, like was able to kind of work around and gain his freedom, and he eventually ran away because he was a freed slave, but he was pretending to live as a slave still.
That was
And
so
like
sad. It was like his one blind spot. I'm glad
I
Hercules got away at least.
and like Billy Lee, he was a
I know.
loyal slave his whole life, and he was loved by Washington, but he didn't um he never gave him his freedom until after he died. I mean, the man had two busted knees and could barely walk, but still wanted to serve Washington because he loved him so much, but he still wasn't freed. Like, it's so hard to look at his life and not be like, dude, what are you doing? Like,
He must have still believed that even though he hated the institution of slavery because of its economic effects, he must have still believed that the you know they were different races and one was inferior, because otherwise he could not have done that. He treated them like they were inferior. I'm guessing because he believed that they were. And it's really sad that he had such a blind spot, like such a major one. After working in the war with all of these soldiers and recognizing that they were just as good as the other soldiers, that, you know, there was no real difference between them. It's sad that he could never get over that. It really would have made a difference for our history, I think, if he had been public about it. But also, our country, I don't know if they would have continued revering him. I don't know. It would have been hard, but I think slavery was such a poison. It just needed to go, and nobody had the courage to step up and do it.
Yeah, and
for fear of the division it would cause.
Some Black people had even written back then, you know, it's we claim all men are created equal, and they believed they would gain their freedom when the war was won.
There was plenty of people telling the truth about this issue. It's just they weren't listening because they wanted the Southern votes and the Southern people in the Union, which we say how well that turned out with the Civil War. Like, it never went away. Like, this problem just stayed. So I understand that they thought it was a problem for later generations to resolve, but like, they were wrong about that. Like, they should have resolved it then.
Yeah, it felt like such a cop-out.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
It definitely made me believe that he cared more about his money than he did about people's lives.
Yeah.
And
for sure,
it definitely makes it hard. Yeah, Ben Franklin was a big abolitionist, Alan. That's why
and like
they didn't
some
want
of the
him to be
people.
president.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Whoa. There were several people that he talked to regularly that were like very anti-slavery. I don't know if all of them were like abolitionists, but like
Hamilton and Lafayette definitely were.
Yes.
And they were his best friends.
I feel like Madison may have been too. There was somebody else like
Madison,
that worked.
Madison wasn't Virginia
maybe it was
slave
somebody else.
plantation.
Oh, okay. There was somebody else.
Adams didn't want to take it on. I know from the biography. Adams was an abolitionist, but he never had a hard stance on it, from what I remember. We will learn more in the next one. But yeah.
So yeah, that was hanging over me as I read this whole biography, but I feel like Chernow really handled it really well by showing Washington as his whole character. You know, this was definitely one of his defects, but he had a lot of really positive features as well, making him like a really ideal candidate for our first president and to keep the Continental Army together. He was the glue. And
his willingness to step down is probably the reason that our government runs as well as it does. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, but him being willing to not grab that absolute power, he could have easily become our king, but he said he didn't want to be, and thankfully he did not want to be.
Yeah, it helped that he didn't want that power. He just wanted to be back at Mount Vernon.
So we are running at 108 minutes, or well, 1 hour, 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Favorite moment.
Oh, favorite moment. You got to prepare me for these things. Let me think about it. You go first.
All right. So let me get to Alan's comment. We didn't even get into the Order of Cincinnati. That was like a whole nother controversy that he went into. The American Cincinnatus. Yeah.
Yeah. That's was that one of the groups that he right, those were so interesting because there was groups that were like not Federalist and they would speak their mind, and he was like, oh, these people are dangerous to the Union and stuff like that because they didn't know how much criticism. He was the first
president of the Cincinnati, but it was was it when your son would be the next? Well, I can't remember what that's called. What is it? Why am I blanking right now?
Primogeniture? Is that what it's called? That's a big word.
Maybe.
It's like their descendant.
Yeah.
You have to have ancestry that's like noble in a sense.
I would say my favorite moment that the book goes over is probably his speeches to his men to keep them for another battle. When their conscription was over, and he just like ran up to the front of the men riding on horseback going, "Men, give me another day. All I need is another day and we can win this war. I need you men for another day or another month." And he did it multiple times through the Revolutionary War. But that strength of character was really, really, really cool. Dude, Alan, that is a huge, his letters to Congress, like, I was so, like, I said it a few times. I have no idea how we won the war. It was a lot of luck, and the British underestimated the United States in so many ways. That is the only reason that America is a country today. Like 18 barrels of gunpowder at the start of the war. It's just nuts.
Yeah. He held that army together with nothing but mirrors and trickery for the outsiders. They didn't even know how under everything they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he didn't even tell his own men.
Yes, it was like a dead secret. Nobody can know that we have not nearly enough troops, like no ammunition. That was incredible. I really loved all of this book. I really loved all of it. But I especially did love that he was so courageous consistently, always going out on the front lines and fighting, even to the end of his life. Like his death happened partially because, he just did not live in fear. He went out it was like snowing or something. It was like way too cold that day, and he just overburdened his poor body, and it finally gave in. Yeah, I love his courage that really comes through in the book, and the fact that he was like divinely protected. Alan and I were talking about this actually. I feel like he was like destined to be our first president, and it feels like the story of it feels like the chosen one trope, but in real life, even though he had flaws, I still feel like he was like the chosen one.
Yeah, a lot of people actually said that God gave us Washington so that we could have a country. And to think about how crazy that is, that it kind of does feel that way. Like, he felt so divinely protected during the war and in his first term, where he really got the ball rolling on our government. Second term, not so much. Second term was pretty crap. But
somebody had to do it.
It was pretty cool. It was really, really cool.
Yes, it was really cool.
Yeah, that is totally true. And he was a really good horseman.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was so funny that he would always like get the white horse, and always be like dressed to the nines. That painting on the cover is like so Washington. I don't know if you can see it. Just love that.
Well, March 1st, we will start the next book. It'll be John Adams by David McCullough. If there's another, I think that's the most famous John Adams. There's also a TV show. If you guys wanted to join on that, I am
cool.
I'm down to do like a watch party. I think it's a miniseries.
Oh, sweet.
It had Paul Giamatti, I think, plays John Adams. I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard it's fantastic. I think a few people helping out in the read-along have watched the miniseries, and they love it. So I've got, Alan said, please ignore the Alien and Sedition Act.
I know.
I've heard that's pretty bad.
Yeah. No, that's bad.
And then Alan also said that the show is great. I'm pretty sure it's Paul Giamatti that does it. It was like an HBO miniseries. But if we can find it, I'd love to do a watch party. We can kind of go into that. But we're going to start that March 1st. So you guys still have time to catch up on Washington. If you have, I know a couple of you said they were only about halfway done. It is quite a long book. So yeah.
And Alan said there was a good movie too for 1776, which I didn't know. So I'm writing all this down.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know. I did not know that 1776 had a movie as well. So I read that in December, getting ready for the read along. And that was really, really cool. And then if anybody's just like, hey, let's the Hamilton musical was not accurate, but it really gets you excited to read the biography, because he used the biography as his basis when he did the musical, and then he just made a bunch of characters Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was not a huge part of Hamilton's life until the end of it, but a lot of times Aaron Burr was a big person. He was the third vice president. He wanted to be the governor of New York. That's kind of why him and Hamilton got in a big fight, because Hamilton did a smear piece on him because Aaron Burr was really wishy-washy. He was a Federalist, then he was a Republican. Well, they were like Democratic Republicans. And then he went back to a Federalist. And so Hamilton was like, I don't like this guy. He has no morals. So that's why he was challenged to a duel. And we all know that story.
Okay.
But,
yes.
So if anybody wants to watch that as well, I would love to do that. So we will sign off. This has been super, super fun. Sorry, the second half wasn't as prepared. Last minute vacation to
Ramsey just
Nevada.
got home.
Yeah, like I got home at 8 p.m. and the live stream was 9 p.m.
And I was texting him like, hey, is this happening?
Well, we were supposed to go to Texas, and Texas just got stupid cold. And so we said, all right, we'll fly to Las Vegas and visit some national parks in that area. And we drove and drove and drove, saw Death Valley. It was amazing. We saw Zion National Park. It was amazing. I still have not seen bighorn sheep. I am super sad about bighorn sheep not being able to be seen by me. But we did feed wild donkeys. I will share that video with you guys.
Great.
Like we in Death Valley National Park, they're actually trying to get rid of them, but there are donkeys and they're a nuisance. So if you want to catch them, you can catch them and take them. They're your donkeys. Because they trample stuff. And so they were just in town in Nevada on the side of the road, and we pulled over and we fed them trail mix. And they reached in the window, but donkeys are not nice creatures. So when we weren't feeding them fast enough, they snorted in the car and scared everybody in the car. So I got it on video. I'll share it with you guys. It was hilarious.
Travel vlog.
We have pictures and videos, and we'll keep the kids' faces out of it, but it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So we will sign off with you guys. Thank you so much. This has been fun. Can't wait to do it again in March. Join the Discord and do the discussion as we're going. And then we'll do the live stream at the end of March, beginning of April. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.